Welcome to In the Name of the Law, with your host, LIISA Speaker from Speaker Law Firm. Joining her today is Stephen Sinas from Sinas Dramis Law Firm, Amy Bailey from Bailey and Terranova Attorneys at Law, and Mary Chartier from Chartier Nyamfukudza PLC. Now, let's discuss some remarkable stories and real cases.
Hello, I'm LIISA Speaker with the Speaker Law Firm. As we all know, sometimes life's not fair, but sometimes it's about moving on and accepting the unfairness. Stay tuned to find out useful information about navigating these difficult situations.
In the name of personal injury law.
I'm here with Steve Sinas of the Sinas Dramis Law Firm in Lansing, Michigan. We're talking today about how life's not fair, and one of your clients was dealt that in spades. Can you tell us about Becky Price's case?
I can. So here's what happened in this case. Becky Price had a house out in DeWitt, and for a number of years she heated that house with fuel oil. And so there was a flange coming out from her basement where the fuel oil company would come and would fill up her tank that was in the basement. So they'd come and attach the hose and fill it up, and that was on every 6 months they would do that. And she called the oil company, at the time it was Mooney Oil Company, and it was about 2016, and she said, I no longer have the tank, I've now changed how I'm heating my home, I don't need your services, and they said okay. And then Mooney was sold to another company called High Point Oil Company, and High Point took the old customer service list and assumed that people like Becky Price who were on that list still needed their services. And so one day in November of 2017, Becky's at work and she gets a call that 400 gallons of fuel oil were just shot into her basement through this flange that still was on the side of her house, but there was no tank anymore. So the guy apparently got to the house, thought she was a customer, attached it, and then didn't pay any attention to what was going on, and 400 gallons shot into the basement, into a drain in her storage room, which then went underneath the foundation of her house. And her house immediately became a hazardous site. She had to move out. She was called home. She had to get home, move out wearing a gas mask. She had lived in this house for 30 years. She raised her family in it. It was the place she was going to retire. It was home. It was home. And so, you know, that's what happened. She had to then move out of the house. Then the house had to be completely destroyed, excavated. She spent 2.5 years in temporary housing. Eventually, a new house was built on the other part of her property. The insurance company involved for the oil company paid for the new house. But then the question was, is she entitled to anything else than just replacing her house? And that was the issue.
So did she have to sue the insurance company to get them to replace her house, or was the lawsuit about something else?
Well, the insurance company is acting on behalf of High Point, and they were the defendant. And so once we got involved, High Point got their insurance company involved, and the house was resolved for the most part. There are some issues we had to work out. But this one issue the issue in the case, was whether Becky could claim any additional compensation for all the distress and anguish that she went through having to be thrown out of her home suddenly.
And did that case go to a jury in Clinton County?
Well, our experience was we took the case in. We said, of course she can make a claim for these damages. Of course she could ask a jury. But Michigan law wasn't as clear as you thought. I scoured every case I could to see if there was an actual case that said that she definitely has this right. There were cases that seemed to indicate that she had the right. I looked in cases from other states, but I realized there wasn't a real clear answer. So the Clinton County Circuit Court made a ruling that she could ask a jury for this money. The jury could give her whatever amount of money they thought was fair. And the trial happened, and they awarded $100,000. And at that point, the oil company pursued an appeal to take away the verdict on the grounds that nobody, no matter what the circumstances are, who's thrown out of their home as a result of someone else's negligence, if they haven't suffered physical injury to themselves, that they're just forced out of their home, nobody has the right to pursue mental anguish damages for that experience.
So then you're in the Court of Appeals, once again fighting the insurance company representing High Point. Something significant happened in the Court of Appeals. Can you tell us what happened?
It was a 14-page opinion. The Court of Appeals ruled in our favor, and I want to read from the passage, a passage from the opinion that really encapsulates the reasoning. The court said, authors and poets alike wax philosophical about the unique value of a home, which often provides as much, if not, in the way of feelings of emotion and memories as it does shelter. A home's unique and particular value has been acknowledged by our Supreme Court, and damage to or destruction of one's home or land would in most cases produce emotional suffering. Additionally, such a loss causes the stress and upheaval of displacement and the need to seek alternative shelter, which does not result from the loss or destruction of personal property. So the court goes on to recognize that this is what is really going on here, that her whole life has been upended by this, and they allow her verdict to stand.
So this is the published opinion from the Court of Appeals, which in and of itself is a significant and development, and then the oil company goes to the Supreme Court, and something really interesting happens because this case, I think, got a lot of press nationwide in the energy industry.
That's
but
right.
That did not go very well. So tell us what happened with that.
So the Court of Appeals comes out with their opinion, and the energy industry across the nation recognizes what happened here in Michigan in this case. And there are newspapers from San Antonio to Connecticut to out west reporting on what the Michigan Court of Appeals did in Becky Price's case. It was really astounding. And so we go to the Supreme Court thinking that the Court of Appeals gave them all the reasoning they need to say this verdict that was decided by a jury should stand. And I argued the case at the Supreme Court, and unfortunately the court, for reasons that still befuddle me, just said, no, we're not going to give anybody in Michigan this right. And so Price versus High Point is now black letter law here in Michigan for the proposition that if a company pollutes your property, forces you out of your house, and your life is upended just like Becky Price's, you have no right to any additional compensation beyond just replacing your house. You can't ask the bad actor who did that to you and your family for any additional compensation. Price versus High Point is the law of the land here in Michigan. I don't think many people realize it. I actually heard from people who were victims of the Kalamazoo oil spill saying that in their litigation, the result in Price versus High Point was a big development because that allowed the oil company there to say, hey, those who have lost use of your house, lost your house, we don't owe you anything other than the value of your house.
Wow. So it really seemed that for Becky Price, life was not fair because she had a jury verdict taken away from her.
Think about how unfair this is for
Right.
Becky. The experience itself shouldn't have happened.
Have the house taken away from her.
Right, she gets the house taken care of.
All of her stuff was
Yes,
probably
yes,
destroyed as
yes.
well.
Her whole life for a few years completely upended. And then she goes to trial court. She has to fight and fight and fight to make it through there. Then she fights the Court of Appeals, and then she gets the explanation that I think makes sense to everybody. And then she has to fight her way to the Supreme Court. And at that point, all these other interest groups come in to take out her verdict and
that don't know anything about her and
Yeah.
don't know anything about the oil company involved,
and
right?
so the result is that the law gave her nothing other than what she had and no additional compensation for her experience. And on top of it all, she knows that her case is the one that is the law of the land here in Michigan for that. So, I'm a proponent of our legal system. I think it does produce fair results in many cases, but there are times where it's jaw-droppingly unfair, and I feel like this case is one of those.
Do we know if any other states have now followed the Price v. High Point case?
Surprisingly, people would think that you would be able to make this claim, but actually most states don't follow a similar rule. So it's really something that's surprising about American law here.
Wow. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
sharing that.
In the Name of Personal Injury Law is brought to you by the Sinas Dramis Law Firm. In the Name of Family Law.
Good morning. I'm here today with Erica Terranova, a family law attorney at the law firm of Bailey in Terranova. And a lot of people getting divorced feel like there's a lot of unfairness in the process and with everything that's going to happen to them through the divorce process. One example is a prenuptial agreement. Sometimes people have prenuptial agreements, and at the end of the day, one of the spouses is not happy that they're not going to be getting as much of a property division because of the prenuptial agreement. Can you address that, Erica?
Yes, I can, Lisa. Prenuptial agreements are used in different circumstances where one party might have had a prior bad experience with a divorce, and they're looking to look forward and have their assets divided in a different manner if they do end up in a divorce. There's another reason. There might be a family business that needs some protection, so they use prenups in that manner. And now with second families and blended families, we're seeing the use of prenuptial agreements to be more common. When prenuptial agreements are drafted, the court wants to make sure they're fair, equitable, and reasonable under the circumstances. If the court can find that, they'll uphold the prenuptial agreement. It's inevitable, though, that at the end of a marriage, that one party is going to be unhappy. And we have circumstances where that party now is looking to have the court not follow the prenuptial agreement. And the courts can look at that and determine, is it still fair for us to do this? Maybe the couple has been married for 30 years and they've accumulated additional assets during the marriage that weren't expected. Or there's a situation where one party didn't work as much as they were expecting the other party to work. So if the facts and circumstances have changed, the court can look at that and develop a property settlement that maybe doesn't exactly follow the prenup. One thing the court wants to make sure, though, is that it was fair when it was entered into. So they look to see, were both parties represented? Did they have an opportunity that both parties went to an attorney to have them review it?
So that brings me to my next question, because working on appeals, divorce appeals with prenuptial agreements, I've seen many cases where we call it the non-moneyed spouse, usually it's the wife, who tells us that she was presented with a prenuptial agreement literally within just days of the wedding. She was maybe even told, okay, you can go see this attorney. I've paid for this attorney to review it with you. And it's right before the wedding, and they feel like they come to us telling us they feel like they didn't have a choice at that point after 200 invitations have gone out and their parents have paid for the wedding, and they go ahead and agree to it. Would that be a ground to have a prenuptial agreement set aside 25 years later?
I think, LIISA, it would. I think the court is going to be skeptical of the one party who is presented with the prenup 2 days before the marriage. I will tell you, we see that a lot. So we really need people to go away from that practice. And if you really want this prenuptial agreement to be upheld, to do it in advance. Give the opportunity for the non-moneyed spouse, as we refer them to have time to find their own counsel of their own choosing, to pay for that counsel, to have a sufficient time to really review the prenuptial agreement. If this is a rush into signing this agreement of you sign this or I'm going to marry you, we're getting into, do we have some duress going on in this relationship or in order to file the prenuptial agreement? And I think the court would take very serious concern with if it's handled that way.
So prenuptial agreements is just one topic that divorcing people complain about not being fair. But another thing I hear about is when maybe one spouse works their entire career, the other one stays home, and then the spouse who has built up a pension or retirement account is like, why should I have to, it's my retirement account, why should I have to share half of my retirement account with my ex-spouse? Can you tell us about how to deal with that situation?
Yes, I can. That is a very hot topic. We have a situation where one party doesn't want the divorce. So they're saying, well, I want half the pension because that's what I'm afforded to under the law. And the other party who worked for the pension is saying, well, wait a minute, I'm the party that went to work every day. I'm the one that got up early. I'm the one that had the stress of this job. So it's that person saying, it's not fair that I have to give you my pension. Well, the other party is saying, well, it's not fair because I stayed at home. I raised our children. I sacrificed my career. So my contribution toward that household is the same as your contribution towards the pension. And the way the court looks at it is that is a marital asset that is going to be subject to division. So that will be divided. So it does not seem fair, but in the end, it doesn't seem fair to either party in those situations.
Right. Another topic I see divorcing parents struggling with is that they're used to having their children in their home every day of the week. And then all of a sudden they're divorced, and now their children are going to the other parent's home maybe 2 days a week, maybe 50% of the time. And a lot of parents have come to me and they just don't feel that that's fair, that they only get to see their children half the time, even though they're the ones that were primarily raising the child.
That happens quite often. And it's typically the feeling of the spouse that doesn't want the divorce. And they're looking at the other parent and saying, I want this marriage to stay in place. I want to raise our children together. You want the divorce. Why do I now have to not see my children every day? And that's very tough. And that parent is saying, life's not fair. I used to see my children every day, and now I have to share my children with you. We have to have two different households. And that's a very popular feeling of the parents who now don't get to see their children every day. And whether it is a 50-50 situation or it is an every other weekend type schedule, that the parents are feeling it's not fair that I can't see my children every day.
And ideally, the parents live close to each other, so it makes it possible to even have quick visits. But I have seen cases where one of the parents is out of state, and that really changes the dynamics, because it's not even just that they're not in the same town and they can only see the child a couple days a week, but they're on the other side of the country, and now they're going for months without seeing their child. I mean, what do we do? I guess there's nothing to do about it, but I mean, courts allow parents to move, right?
That is true, and I'm dealing a case with that right now, LIISA, and we have a parent that's moving, and I had to explain to my client, unfortunately, your child is going to have to spend some time out of state with the other parent. The courts do encourage time with both parents as long as it's in the children's best interest, that the children are going to be able to spend time with both parents, and it is tough because there are situations where they are going to have to travel out of state.
But the bottom line is life will be different after divorce, isn't it?
It will be, LIISA. Thank you,
Erica.
In the Name of Family Law is brought to you by Bailey and Terranova Attorneys at Law. Go to WLAJ.com for more information on today's topics and to view other In the Name of the Law episodes. In the Name of Criminal Defense.
We're here with Mary Chartier and Takura Nyamfukudza, criminal defense attorneys from Chartier Nyamfukudza. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks, LIISA.
So first, Fourth Amendment issues come up all the time in criminal cases, isn't that right?
They do.
Absolutely.
So tell us about some of the issues that people encounter.
Well, I can tell you the Fourth Amendment today, I don't think is the same one that the forefathers envisioned, right? Now we have little cell phones that carry a lot of information on there, and the Fourth Amendment applies to those. So we also deal with issues where GPS tethers are placed on cars, and of course, interactions that citizens have with police officers on the streets, in their homes, and in cars.
It's been really interesting how technology has changed this area. So I've been practicing for a long time, a lot longer than Takura. And historically, it was searches of a person, their home, their car, and then as Takura said, now we have searches related to cell phones, where cell phone tracking is a part of every aspect of your life. And what's really interesting is now the phones where your face can get into the cell phone. And so historically, people don't have to give up their passcode to the police or to the government. And we're starting to move into an area where sometimes the police will just hold a phone up in front of someone's face to try and get into the phone, even if they're not consenting.
Wow. So let's talk about consent. If a person does not consent, does that give the police the ability to go and get a warrant?
So the fact that someone doesn't consent doesn't factor into the warrant standard. As criminal defense attorneys, we always advise people to assert their constitutional rights and not to consent to a search at all. Gives us so much more to work with. A lot of people say, well, if I don't consent, does that mean that the police are going to think that I'm guilty?
They already think you're guilty. That's
exactly right. That's why they want to search your car, your phone, your house. They already think you're guilty. So the fact that you're saying, no, go get a warrant and come back with a warrant doesn't factor into the equation that a judge can use to determine if the warrant is valid.
So let's talk about automobiles. What's the rules for searching an automobile if you're pulled over for a stop?
So there once was a time the driver could say, oh yeah, sure, go ahead and search anything that you find in there, even if it's a bag that belongs to the passenger. But thankfully, the Supremes came to their senses and they said, no, you can't do that. Generally, a police officer, provided the initial stop is valid, can have people come out of the car if it's for officer safety and they have a reason for that. And what's within the arm, the wingspan is what we call it, that's the legalese. They can search containers and so on. But the standards are relaxed as compared to the home because, again, we can have the tint on our windows and that sort of thing regulated. So the standards are a little bit more relaxed, but officers don't have carte blanche, that's for
So
sure.
they can't go into the glove compartment or into the trunk without getting permission from the people in the vehicle?
Depending, there's the search incident to arrest standard, if it's an inventory of the car, if someone has been arrested. So there are definitely exceptions that allow them to do more, but the law has been restricted a little bit by the Michigan Supreme Court recently. What's actually sort of an interesting twist on it, and is part of our favorite television show, which is Breaking Bad, is there was an episode where they were in, for anyone who's a Breaking Bad fan, they were in a mobile home, and they were saying, no, this is not being used as a vehicle, it's being used as a home, you have to come back with a warrant. But there's a lot of intricacies to this area, which is why, again, it's always important to tell folks, don't consent. If the police believe they have probable cause to go get a warrant or probable cause to do the search, let them do it. Don't consent. Gives us so much more to work with.
So let's talk about probable cause. Have you ever had a situation where a tip was called in by an anonymous person because they were mad at this other person?
Yes. So that has happened more than once. They're anonymous phone callers. They'll get mad at an ex-boyfriend or an ex-girlfriend or some other friend that they used to hang around with, and they'll make a call in, and then that will require the police to pull the person over. And so it's really interesting when we're able to go back and say, this is not some good Samaritan citizen.
Right.
This is actually someone they have a grudge with.
Right.
Exactly. Or
Does that stop the search from happening? I mean,
Well, no, usually by the time it's come to us, they've searched and they found something.
That's right.
Right.
So
you
we're trying to
kinda
keep it
suppress
out.
the
Right.
search. Okay.
Right. When we get involved, usually there's at least an allegation that there's been some wrongdoing.
What about trash cans sitting outside of your house?
Oh boy. If you leave it outside, the police frequently they go through people's trash.
Oh,
and unfortunately,
my trash can.
Right. They go through the
I have great days.
nastiest. They go through the nastiest trash
absolutely.
on those trash poles.
And often, depending on the type of charge, they can get light bills and even clippings, right? If they believe that they're searching something that came from a drug house.
That tie the trash can to the house, or
That's
Right.
correct.
So
That's
what will
correct.
happen frequently is they'll work with the folks who are legitimately collecting the trash, and then they'll pick up the trash, take it to the corner, the police will take the trash, and they'll go through it. And they will really go through it. They'll spread out a big plastic, tarp, and then they go through all the trash. As Takura said, they'll find a bill that says John Smith lives in this house, but they'll also frequently find, residue on plastic wrap, as Takura said, marijuana clippings, all kinds of things that they then use to try and build their case.
Right.
wow. Any other tips about searches?
I will say, this is taking us back a little bit. There was a tactic that police would often use once they pull somebody over, right? They have a hunch in their training and experience that tells them crime is afoot. They would extend those searches, right? They would have a dog come and for that reason keep people there and then try to dig up evidence of what they think is some criminal activity.
So here's a good question. You mentioned the dogs. Is that having a dog pass by somebody, maybe that the dog alerts the officer that they smell something, does that provide probable cause to then search the person?
It can, but then when the case comes to us, we really have to challenge that drug dog and their expertise, because drug dogs have a lot of flaws. And I love dogs, but they do. Thank you so much, LIISA, for
Thank
having
you for
us on
coming on.
today. And for folks who are interested in learning more about this topic or other constitutional issues, check out our podcast. We are Constitutional Defenders. It's on cndefenders.com or on iTunes or any other platform where podcasts are hosted.
In the Name of Criminal Defense is brought to you by Chartier Nyamfukudza PLC.
Well, thank you everybody for sharing so much helpful information today. Steve, you had an amazing story to share about your client's case. And Takura, the wonderful tips that you provided for people to know what their rights are. And of course, Erica, a lot of people divorcing have to think about how their life is going to change, and it isn't fair all the time. Any thoughts that you want to share?
Well, I think people would like to think that the law can always provide a fair remedy for a situation, and sometimes the remedy is fairer than others, and then sometimes it's completely unfair. And I feel like in the Becky Price case that I talked about, that was a completely unfair result. You know, her whole life was disrupted. The jury came back with the award. There's no reason why that award shouldn't have stood, and then the Michigan Supreme Court just said, we're going to take it away from you, and that's the result she's got to live with. So I think it's pretty unfair.
And I find in divorce cases, most people do feel that life is unfair, or that it's unfair that their marriage is dissolving, that they're sharing kids, that the property settlement wasn't fair. But the judges do have to do what is fair and equitable, so we hope that they are doing what's fair. Unfortunately, most people feel that it is unfair on how the result ended.
Right.
It's been my experience that a lot of, for lack of a better phrase, lay people believe that, boy, if I just get my side of the story out, if I tell the truth, then everything will be all right. But it doesn't always work out that way. And when you are with a police officer, that is not the time and place to try to figure all of this out. And there are different rules that apply out there than inside the courtroom. So I would strongly urge people to let professionals help them.
Right, they should have an attorney with them,
Right.
helping them make their decisions, right?
Absolutely.
Well, in all of these cases, having an attorney to stand by you and be your advocate is really important.
Yeah, because we quickly learned that, like what Takura was saying, that people assume that things are going to be handled the right way, right? One way or the other. It doesn't matter what issue you're talking about, but if you don't have your representation and you don't really know your rights in whatever area of law you're dealing with, you quickly find out that your good intentions are being swallowed up by all the stuff out there that is working against you. And so, unfortunately, that's how people have to think through their problems. Watch out.
Right. Now, in your case, you talked about a jury giving the victim some remedy and then the Supreme Court taking it away. But with Erica's cases involving property divisions or prenuptial agreements or even custody, I mean, if it's not a fair decision that's reached by the judge, there's always an appeal that hopefully can, fix the situation that was done wrongly by a trial court.
That is true.
Right.
You do have those options. They might be lengthy options, but you do always have those options out there for you. Unfortunately, while that is pending, you're still dealing with the situation that was determined by the trial court,
Right.
and you have to live with that at least for the time being.
Right.
And my final point would be that, to be clear, I don't hate the police, and I believe that most officers, certainly, at least when they begin, want to do the right thing, but not all of them do. And again, I would just urge that even if it's not with Chartier and Nyamfukudza, that you have an attorney help you out through these Fourth Amendment and other issues.
And I fully believe in our legal process overall. It's just sometimes there are instances where the result isn't fair, and so it's not perfect.
Right.
It's certainly a good procedure we have, but it's not always perfect.
Thank you, Takura, Erica, and Steve.
Thank you, LIISA.
Thank you for joining us today for In the Name of the Law. Please go to WLAJ.com for more information on today's topics, and please join us next week for another informative show.